Good morning. Thank you, everyone. We have 56 people so far. My name is Erica Rossetti. Many of you probably know me from working with the Schuylkill Action Network for the past 3 years. And I'm calling in today from my remote office in my house in Philadelphia, which, like the rest of the Schuylkill watershed, is the native Lenape land. So just keep that in mind wherever you're calling in from today. And I'm very pleased to see both some new and some familiar faces or names here on Zoom. And very excited to be able to bring some great presentations to you today. So here's our agenda for this morning. I'm going to kick us off with some updates and introductions about the SAN. And then we'll turn it over to 4 fantastic speakers we have with us today. We'll also in the middle have time to announce our SAN MVPs, and we'll also take a short 5-minute break in the middle. And before we get started, I would also like to introduce 2 of my new coworkers who will be helping run the meeting today and also be running the Schuylkill Action Network moving forward. So first, I would like to introduce Katie Evers, who's coming to us from White Clay Creek State Park. She's going to be working on all things SAN communications, outreach and engagement. And then I would like to introduce Megan Regalis, who is coming to us from Bucks County Conservation. And she is our Schuylkill Action Network manager. So I'm going to briefly turn it over to Katie and then Megan to introduce themselves. Even though we're not in person today, I thought it would be nice so you could see their faces, get to know them a little bit, and they'll be the point of contact moving forward.
All right, thank you very much, Erica. My name is Katie Evers. I am an engagement specialist at PDE, and I'll be working with Megan in the SAN. I graduated from University of Delaware with a degree in plant science in the winter of 2017, and I'm coming to the partnership from Delaware State Parks. I love mountain biking and hiking new trails, and I'm excited to keep learning more about the watershed and diving into all of the wonderful projects going on in the SAN. So, hello all.
And good morning, everybody. My name is Megan Regalis, as Erica mentioned, and I'm the Schuylkill Action Network manager. This is the end of my 2nd week with PDE, but I'm thrilled to join the team and looking forward to supporting this great collaborative network of partners going forward. So nice to meet you all.
Thanks, ladies. And I'll also say Kate Huddlemeyer is on the call as well from PDE. I think she just turned her camera on. I'm not sure if everyone can see her, but if at any point today you're having technical difficulties or questions, feel free to reach out to any of the 4 of us. All right, so now that you know who we are, I also wanted to share a few housekeeping things just about being on Zoom webinar. You probably noticed that if you're an attendee, you're automatically muted today and your video will be off. We do have the chat open and we also have a Q&A feature. So the chat we ask to use for like private messages, technical things, or networking. But if you have questions for any of our presenters today, please do use that Q&A feature or raise your hand and we can actually unmute you. And then finally, the webinar is being recorded today, so you will be able to rewatch it and we'll send out all of those resources after the meeting. Now we'd like to get a sense of who all of you are today. So we have 3 brief poll questions that I'll share. The first is where you're joining us from today, and this is by watershed. The second is which sector you're from. And the third is getting a sense of how many people are old timers versus newcomers. So I will leave that open for a couple of more seconds. Also at this time, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as well. If you could state your name, organization, and both your native and modern location names, that would be great. So it looks like most people are calling in from within the Schuylkill watershed. A good mix of sectors here today, from government, nonprofit, water and wastewater, academia, and then mostly returning faces, but a couple of new folks. So welcome. I'm going to end this poll and share the results for anyone that wants to see it. And then we will move on. So before I hand our meeting over to our wonderful speakers, I do have a brief introduction where we just wanted to highlight some of the accomplishments of the SAN in 2021, which is historically kind of the purpose of our SAN annual meeting. So as you all know, 2021, like 2020, was a rather different and difficult year for, I think, most of us, from COVID to environmental justice to flooding. So I just wanted to highlight how the SAN has adapted this year and how we plan to move forward. All of our presentations today are under the theme of adaptation and resiliency. So we wanted to kick it off with how the SAN has been doing that this year. So first off, at the beginning of 2021, we did release our 5-year strategic action plan. That's on our website, and we can also put the link in the chat. So as part of that, we ended up combining 2 of our old work groups and creating a new engagement and stewardship work group. So this is our current structure. We have our 2 governing bodies, and then we have 6 of our work groups where our partners continue to do amazing work. So in 2021, we held 1 executive steering committee meeting, 10 planning committee meetings so far, probably more to come. And across all of our work groups, I believe we had 21 work group meetings. Most of our meetings were on Zoom. We actually saw that this increased engagement, as well as a couple of hybrid meetings that we did, because we were able to offer these virtual options. We find more people are able to attend. It also, as a bonus, reduces our climate impact when we're not, driving from Schuylkill County down to Philadelphia County and vice versa. We also did have a couple of in-person events that we adapted. They were all outdoors. Some of them had registration limits. And so just quickly from left to right, instead of our annual bus tour, we did just a project showcase at 1 location. This is at the Northwestern Stables in Philadelphia, which is a Schuylkill River Restoration Project site. In the middle here, we have some students installing street art stickers. So we were still able to work with 3 schools this year to do that. And a lot of students, we actually had like little lessons for them outside on the sidewalk, which was a lot of fun. So we continued that. And this picture from the right here is from our stormwater tour. I think last week or 2 weeks ago, our stormwater work group went to the Philadelphia Zoo to view their green stormwater infrastructure. So we are still able to move all of our programs along. And we were also able to do some new projects because there's so much travel and meeting expenses budgeted for the SAN, and we didn't really have that in 2020 or 2021. We kind of were able to get creative with some of that money. So one thing we did was create nature journaling kits, some of which are still available. If you're interested, please reach out about that. That's the picture on the top here. We also were able to provide scholarships for 2 women who are people of color and also first-time paddlers to join the 2021 Schuylkill River Sojourn. So they were camping and kayaking down the river for free that week. And we did our Schuylkill River Sojourn steward this year. Her name was Riel Bilto. She was fantastic. And she created for us a video documenting the experience down the Schuylkill. We were hoping that this video would be a way for people who couldn't actually get out on the river to see what it was like. So she did a great job. There's interviews, There's, she talks about industry, pollution, partners. So if you have a couple of minutes of free time, I encourage you to check that out, and we can put the link in the chat as well. Another way that the SAN has adapted in 2021 is through our progress report. Typically, the progress report is a few months behind. So, for example, our progress from 2020 was released mid-2021 this year. But because there weren't any really in-person events or people to hand out physical copies of this to, we adapted by creating an interactive story map online. So our progress report from 2020 highlights different events, Schuylkill River Restoration Fund projects, and metrics. So for example, I just pulled out 2 examples that stuck out to me. Partners installed 254 agricultural BMPs in 2020, and 34,500 acres of the Schuylkill watershed is preserved. So those are just some example of the things that are in this report. The link is there again if you want to check that out, and we are hoping to create another one for 2021 soon to track our progress. And this is kind of where we might need all of your help. So speaking of progress reports, we try and get metrics and data and measure our progress with the help of all of you. So this graphic here, these 4 boxes are pulled from our 5-year strategic plan. These are showing the different categories for our progress benchmarks. So each one of these categories has a bunch of different metrics that we're all collectively aiming for together. These are things like acres restored, dollars funded, number of people engaged, number of projects installed. So to look at these benchmarks more in depth, you can go to our strategic action plan, but we'll also try and be asking all of you and all of our partners to keep an eye out for a survey at the end of the year to really help us track some of this data. So I know I already went a couple of minutes over my introduction time, so I'm going to stop my presentation here and turn it over to our first speaker. So I am very pleased to welcome Tim Fenchel from Schuylkill River Greenways. Tim is an active member of the SAN Planning Committee, and he's also a member of our engagement and stewardship work group. He actually was the chair of that work group for the past couple of years, even when it was the recreation work group. He has over 20 years of experience managing grant programs and accomplishing projects that help improve the Schuylkill River and recreation along it. So we've asked him to join us today to speak about a new initiative to get people engaged with the Schuylkill River while also adapting to COVID and the needs of the community. So Tim, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Thanks, Erica. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you this morning. I know that the SAN annual meeting each year is a really fun event that I always look forward to in November, getting together. But you know, the planning committee felt that another year here doing it virtually would be the best choice. But I know we all look forward to getting back together in person next year, together at some point, hopefully in November again next year. So looking forward to that. But thanks for joining us this morning. I'm going to share my screen here and get going with my presentation.
Tim, you will have till 10:36 if that works.
All right. Can everybody see that presentation?
Looks great.
Okay, great. So Erica asked me to share this morning a little bit on a project that the Schuylkill River Greenways started last year in 2020, and to share a little bit about how we've adapted and had some resilience with the theme of recreation, and also to talk a little bit about outdoor recreation during COVID over the last year and a half or so. So as many of you know who we are, the Schuylkill River Greenways. Our strategic plan our new strategic plan was adopted in 2017. And our mission, our organizational mission, is to connect residents, visitors, and communities to the Schuylkill River and the Schuylkill River Trail. We basically our job is to champion the Schuylkill River and to promote stewardship of the Schuylkill River. And we do that really by using the Schuylkill River Trail and the river itself for economic development projects, education projects, and conservation projects. So Erica just mentioned the Schuylkill River Sojourn. Our organization does several big events, outdoor recreation events each year. Obviously, the Sojourn is our biggest one. We just finished our 23rd annual Schuylkill River Sojourn. We held it this past August. Usually it's in June. We will be going back to June in 2022. But it's a 7-day paddling event that happens all for 7 days from Schuylkill Haven all the way down to Boathouse Row. That event requires a lot of organization on our part, as well as dozens of other partners. We have about 200 paddlers that join us each week during the Sojourn. Our other big event is our Ride for the River. It's a bike ride, which takes place in September in partnership with Sly Fox Brewing Company. We typically have between 300 and 400 riders that go for either a 16-mile or a 40-mile bike ride on the Schuylkill River Trail. And we've done both of these over the last number of years with several different outfitters and partners that have helped us with support for those things. And a lot of our work requires the assistance of an outfitter. We also have a bunch of programs that we do. We have youth education programs. We have summer camps. We have our famous pedal and paddle program, which we host, probably a half dozen or 8 of those each year that introduce folks to the Schuylkill River Trail and the Schuylkill River, to biking and paddling. It's a really, really great way to introduce them to our organization and other partners in the area. Again, we have the need for an outfitter to help us with that, to provide biking, to be guides on water, on the trail, provide equipment. So a lot of our work requires assistance beyond what our staff capacity offers. There has been a history of outfitting on the Schuylkill, although not a very consistent one. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Delaware, the Lehigh as being having really solid outfitters, lots of recreation happening on those rivers, as well as the Susquehanna. People go there to recreate, people go there to paddle, people go there to bike and fish. It hasn't been as consistent of a story on the Schuylkill for whatever reason. We've worked with 3 or 4 outfitters over the last 15 or 20 years, and some have come and gone. Some of them still exist in smaller quantities, but it just hasn't really gained a traction and the foothold that we had hoped that it would. And so our organization, knowing that we needed to have this to support our mission, as well as the mission of other partners along the Schuylkill, we thought we would try to develop a program of a recreation hub, where we would potentially have hubs up and down the Schuylkill River where people could more easily and more efficiently access recreation, whether it's biking or hiking or paddling, canoeing, outdoor recreation programs. And we did about 2.5 years ago a feasibility study with the Fox School of Business at Temple, as well as a consultant called Cycle Forward. And need to move through this piece of it pretty quickly, but they came out with a plan that was helpful. We did an RFP and identified a couple outfitters who were interested in working with us. And that program started in about 2018, and we had some success building off of that in 2018 and then 2019. And through the support of those 2 outfitters, we continued to provide our programming. They also provided programming for communities and other partners. And it was starting to build on some momentum. We were starting to head in the direction that we had hoped. And then something called COVID-19 happened in the spring of 2020. And both of the outfitters that we were working with communicated to us that they were going to have to close their doors they were no longer going to be able to offer us the services that we needed. So they say that necessity is the mother of all invention. And they also say that imitation is the best form of flattery. And both of those things really came to fruition for us in the spring of last year. We had known about this model of outfitting, but we began to look into it much more aggressively last spring. I'm sure that some of you know and have heard of the Pinelands Preservation Alliance. It's a nonprofit 501c3 working on preservation work in the Pinelands over in New Jersey. They have an outfitter that is connected to them. And so we had conversations with their leadership and with their staff. And as we got to understand and began to really get a better grasp of what that partnership was like and how they worked together, we felt like that this was a model that we could potentially implement here in the Schuylkill River. So we put together a business plan. Our staff spent a couple weeks putting together a business plan of how we might pull this off. We worked with our board of directors who gave us the green light to continue to pursue this idea. We did lots of due diligence. And basically, in May of last year, we created an LLC, a limited liability corporation, that is called Take It Outdoors. And that limited liability corporation purchased the assets of one of the outfitters that was going out of business. We hired a director who runs the entire program and runs the business. And we began to move forward with how this was going to start working in the Schuylkill last year. So it's a LLC. Take It Outdoors is a limited liability corporation, and its sole member is the board of directors of the Schuylkill River Greenways. Takes a little while to get your mind around how this works, but Take It Outdoors has their own staff. They have separate accounting from SRG. They have separate business insurance from Schuylkill River Greenways. And they report directly to the board of directors of the Schuylkill River Greenways. There are 2 board members on SRG's board that work as liaisons to Take It Outdoors. And we have a staff member as well that is a liaison between our organization and Take It Outdoors as well. So there's no doubt that at the beginning of this project, we were not sure whether this was going to be a good idea or not. Opening an outfitter in the midst of a pandemic when other outfitters were closing certainly had a lot of question marks to it, and we were not sure whether this was going to be a good idea, but we moved forward with it and purchased all the assets. And on June 8th of 2020, we had our grand opening. Take It Outdoors is located in Pottstown, across the river from our office. If you know where our office is in Riverfront Park, it's on the other side of the river. And on June 8th, as I said, they opened and they had kayak rentals, canoe rentals available. Take It Outdoors operates our free bike share program, which has been in existence since 2008. They also provide shuttle services up and down the river for folks that are wanting to recreate, whether it's paddling, canoeing, biking to different trailheads. They have also done a fantastic job of supporting groups, and I'll get into some of that in a little bit further in my presentation here. They are open Wednesdays through Sunday, and so I'll give you some information a little bit here on how you can contact them. So we opened in June, and if you can think back to June of 2028, that's sort of when we were somewhat coming out of our homes and starting to re-engage with the outdoors and with society after the pandemic. So we opened in June, and as I mentioned, they also manage our free bike share program. So I'll just give you a little bit of background on how this has gone for the first year and a half. Take It Outdoors offers weekly events. They have Wednesday evening paddles that are open to the public. They move them all throughout the watershed, Marsh Creek, Blue Marsh Lake, lots of different locations on the Schuylkill. And then every Friday night, they host Friday night bike rides on the Schuylkill River Trail. Again, they move everywhere from sections of the trail in Philadelphia to all the way up in Berks and Schuylkill counties. They do annual trips. They have a Memorial Day paddle. They do a Birds by Boat program with John James Audubon Center. We've done moonlight paddles. We have a July 4th weekend pedal and paddle. We had an international Observe the Moon paddle this past year that sadly was clouded over, but was well attended. We had a fall foliage paddle this year. Every year, we have plans to do a Black Friday opt outside paddle in partnership with REI. And then we also will do a luminary paddle, which happens in partnership with the Schuylkill Canal Association in the Phoenixville area. And these are just some of the programming that Take It Outdoors has run over the last couple of years for us. Take It Outdoors does overnight trips. They have done overnight trips on the Schuylkill. They have done overnight trips on the Susquehanna. They have had groups call and book them to do overnight trips. So it's a really fantastic way to get people out away from sort of their daily lives and to get away for a couple of days. Those have been very successful. But the real niche that we believe and the real heart of why we sort of pursued this model for outfitting on the Schuylkill was the ability to not only support our work and our mission of getting people on the Schuylkill River and on the SRT, but to also partner with other organizations. And so we've been able to do that. Take It Outdoors has a really unique position. They have, over the past 2 years, partnered with folks like the Green Valleys Association, with several state parks and their educators, with the John James Audubon Society. They've done programming for Pottsgrove School District, for the Kimberton School. They've supported some charter schools in Philadelphia with paddling and biking. And this is really where we think we really see the potential for the support for organizations up and down the river, and many of you potentially even listening this morning. We've been able to get young people into the river, into the water. We combined watershed education with what Take It Outdoors has been doing. Take It Outdoors has done a lot of work with Sarah Crothers, who is our education director, with our Schuylkill Explorers program and our other education programs. And we really find that this is really at the heart of what we want Take It Outdoors to be, is really working with the next generation and getting young people involved in the outdoors. And so it's really been successful for that over the last year and a half. So just in conclusion and wrapping up, in 2020, Take It Outdoors served about 1,200 people. And this past year in 2021, we served just over 2,000 people. And then, of course, I wanted to talk a little bit about the impact that COVID had on recreation. As I said, we were not sure whether opening an outfitter in May and June of 2020 was going to be a good idea, but hindsight being 2020, we all know the impact that COVID had on outdoor recreation. There was an explosion of outdoor recreation in 2020, not only in our area, but all across the country. People really communicated very loudly with their feet and with their activities that they wanted to be outdoors, both for physical wellness and mental wellness. And we saw those continued high numbers in 2020. The Schuylkill River Trail use increased over 100% on much of the section of the SRT. There are some places in the nation and some trails that saw over a 200% increase in trail use in 2020. Outdoor equipment has been extremely difficult to get a hold of. Bikes and kayaks are hard to purchase. In fact, Take It Outdoors had a really hard time. They had to wait a year for new bikes and kayaks. But it's been interesting that we've had sort of mixed results for our own outdoor recreation programming. And I can say that many of our partners who I've spoken to would share in that. Our Sojourn, for example, this past August was the highest and most well-attended Sojourn we've ever had in 23 years. And then our bike ride in the fall our numbers fell off a little bit. And we've seen that all throughout the summer. Our pedal and paddles were extremely well attended. And then we've talked to some other partners where, some programs haven't been. So I think people have really engaged in outdoor recreation in smaller settings or in places where they can go out with their family, with their kids, with close friends. And, that has changed a little bit in 2021 as we've seen people return to sort of more formal outdoor recreation programming. So in hindsight, it proved to be a fantastic time to open up Take It Outdoors and to take on that project. So I really had to squeeze a lot of information into these 15 or 20 minutes. So I apologize for going so quickly. There were some details that I had to move through quickly or skip on. So hopefully you have been able to understand what this project was like and what it means. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any questions in the chat box.
Thanks so much, Tim. We have about 2 minutes here. If anyone has questions for Tim, feel free to drop those in the chat or the Q&A. I did see that Deb Penrod has her hand raised, so we'll allow Deb to speak if they have a question for you. Okay, maybe no question there.
I'll add
but
while we're
Patrick-
waiting that you can go Take It Outdoors as a website. It's called takeitoutdoorsadventures.com. Their website shows the full list of services that they provide. They also have a software program that allows you to pre-register for rentals or for the shuttle service. Noah Phillips is the gentleman's name who is the director of Take It Outdoors. You can get his contact information on the Take It Outdoors website. He's a fantastic guy who's done a really, really great job for Take It Outdoors the first year and a half, first 2 seasons. And he's got a lot of great ideas for how Take It Outdoors services could be a part of maybe your programming or some of the things that you may need in the watershed. So go take a look at takeitoutdoors.com and you can get lots more information there.
And Tim, we did have one question from Patrick asking about funding. So was there a subsidy to Take It Outdoors or purely revenue driven or grant funding to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's really one of the reasons why we feel like this model has the potential to be much more sustainable than other outfitters have been able to prove over the last 20 or 30 years on the Schuylkill. Obviously outfitting is a somewhat seasonal business, and that's probably what's made it difficult for some to survive. Well, this model basically allows for Take It Outdoors, the outfitter, to be a nonprofit because of their connection to Schuylkill River Greenways and our board of directors. So the funding is a combination of multiple different sources. Of course, revenue from the rental business and the livery and the shuttle service, and corporate groups that hire us for guiding. That's one source of revenue. The other one is grant funding. They have access to grant funds through the Schuylkill River Greenway. So we have applied for grants that support their work. Obviously, a lot of our work, we pay Take It Outdoors to support our sojourn, to support our bike ride, and all of the group projects that we do, group events that we do. We support them that way as well. But so the balance and the diversity of funding and revenue sources for this model is really what we've seen being successful, not only with us, but we were convinced of this when we met with the folks at Pinelands Preservation Alliance and Pinelands Adventures. They've been in business for, I think, 6 or 7 years now. And that their model is the same. They have grant funding and also just revenue from their work that basically make up their entire organizational budget.
Great, thank you so much, Tim. We are going to go to our next speaker, but if anyone has questions for Tim, we'll have some time at the end, or you can chat him via Zoom, and Katie has also put his email address in the chat if you'd like to reach out to him.
Thanks, everyone.
And I know there's a lot of kudos happening in the chat for Tim as well. So thanks, Tim. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Mike Burns, who is a PhD research assistant at Villanova University's Center for Resilient Water Systems. And Villanova is a leader in this region for research and implementation of important topics like green infrastructure, engineering solutions, climate change resilience. So since so many of our partners are thinking about stormwater as we see our region developing, and as we see our region being affected by increasing floods and climate events, we asked Mike to come speak to us today about some of his lessons learned from implementing stormwater projects and studying them in this region. So he's going to be talking about how we need to keep in mind climate change, hydrology, community, and vulnerability. So thanks, Mike, for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Great, thank you. Let me just share my screen. Okay. All right, good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be joining you today. I think based on the poll results, I hit every checkbox that was not in the majority, which is pretty interesting. So I hope to offer a different perspective. So I'm a PhD student at Villanova University. So there's the academic sector checkmark, advised by Dr. Andrea Welker. And most of our work is in the Delaware River watershed. So that's the checkmark of outside of the Schuylkill River. And this is my first event with this group. So I'm excited to be here. I actually earned my master's at Villanova and published a thesis focused on evapotranspiration work in a rain garden. So I'm pretty excited to talk about green stormwater control measures and how our work fits within the Delaware River Watershed Initiative. Before I dive into that stuff, I just wanted to give a brief overview of what we're doing at Villanova. So I'm fortunate to be a part of the Center for Resilient Water Systems. And our mission at VCRUIS is to evolve sustainable stormwater management and foster public and private partnerships through our research. So as such, our work touches on a whole variety of engineering topics focused on environmental, geotechnical, and water resource engineering. And I would argue that the majority of our research focuses primarily on green stormwater infrastructure, or if you prefer, stormwater control measures or BMPs. There's a lot of titles flying around for that type of design. We have 6 faculty members within the core of the program, which have contributed to over 20 years of research. From the different funders you see here, we have been awarded a large number of grants that have contributed to lab work, field work, staffing, graduate student research, and outreach. So the project that I'm working on is part of the Delaware River Watershed Initiative funded by the William Penn Foundation, and our involvement has been active for quite some time now, and I saw some of the other members of the DRWI in the attendees list, so I'm happy to see them there as well. It's a comprehensive program that brings together north of 50 organizations that work to create and maintain clean water for those who live within the Delaware Basin. So Villanova is a representative of the academic sector, but there are plenty of other groups, municipalities, nonprofits, consultants, and engineering firms that contribute to this very important work. Villanova is fortunate to have a place within the DRWI, and most of our work relies on the strong partnership with some of these entities. And today I'm going to discuss how our research within the DRWI helps inform on stormwater resilience and adaptation strategies. So the first site I want to introduce to you is a rain garden located at Abington Friends School in Jenkintown, Pennsylvania, which is about 14 miles north of Philadelphia. So the design of this rain garden is a typical rain garden design. It's a bowl that has a depression and berms on the side that's designed to manage your typical event for this region and the climate that we experience here in Pennsylvania. The contributing drainage area for the initial studies was a parking lot that is directly connected to it as a capture point that flows into the system. And then in terms of drainage, there is an under drain that serves as a mechanism for any overflow to exit the rain garden for events that exceed the capacity of the system. That overflow contributes to the headwaters of Jenkintown Creek, which then continues to flow downstream. And there's another rain garden on this property that also functions to manage stormwater from another parking lot, but it really highlights how good of a partner Abington Friends School was in creating this live laboratory for the students while also serving a real purpose in stormwater management. So let's turn to some of the lessons learned about the rain garden. It's been monitored since 2015 via different types of instruments that focus on tracking the water movement within the system. Specifically, there are soil moisture sensors and bubblers, which are really water level sensors based on pressure differences. There is also a flow meter downstream that has been measuring the flow rate of the Jenkintown Creek on a continuous basis. So the real goal or the real benefit is continuous monitoring, and how that has provided us with a large data set that can help guide research insights and draw some conclusions from the trends that we observed while monitoring the site. We can also track how much water is moving through the system, how much water is coming in, how much is ponding, how long is it ponding, are the plants using the water efficiently, does the soil over infiltrate or under infiltrate? These are the foundations for a lot of our research questions when it comes to green stormwater infrastructure research, especially when you consider soil and vegetation. We also have a pretty rich water quality data set that looks at trends on an event basis. So we look at low flow conditions and storm conditions, and we piece those results together to determine how well the system can manage pollutant loads. So since we have been monitoring for so long, even through visual inspection, we are able to identify problems and correct accordingly. One such problem occurred when we noticed that the garden was overflowing pretty consistently in 2018. It turns out that something was altered upstream, that really limited the performance of the system. So as a result, a swale or a diversion was created and installed adjacent to the rain garden that functions to handle the additional flow. We also noticed clogging at the underdrain opening. And since we were able to monitor the system, we could identify the problem and put maintenance procedures in place so that it would not occur as frequently. And since we identified the clogging and remediated it, we haven't seen clogging of the system since. The next site that I'd like to showcase is located at College Settlement Day Camp in Horsham, Pennsylvania, which isn't too far from the Abington Friends School, also within the Delaware River watershed. It's a pretty unique design. It has 3 basins that function together in this sort of 3-celled stormwater management system. Like Abington, it's outfitted with continuous monitoring equipment that is, again, focused on tracking water quantity and water quality. There are some additional design elements, such as the agri-drain control system you see there at the outflow location and a flume a bit further downstream of the system. So one of the hallmarks of this site is that it was originally designed to promote infiltration of water into deeper soil layers for storage so that the vegetation could use. Over time, however, it was observed that infiltration wasn't occurring as expected. And it turns out that there was bedrock that was pretty close to the bottom of the basins, preventing water from moving downward. And another complicating factor of the design was that some compaction occurred during construction. Compaction is great for foundations and other designs, not so much for stormwater controls that aim for infiltration. So it limited the amount of openings within the soil for water to move down into. So the system was modified and converted into a constructed stormwater wetland instead, and that's marked by a constant water surface. The vegetation choice was then adapted to reflect this change in hydrology as more water-loving plants were introduced into the system. And in terms of biodiversity, this was an exceptional change that introduced new flora and fauna to the system, providing benefits that were not necessarily part of the plan to begin with. It's still a design system, so future climate scenarios do need to be considered to ensure that the performance is continued. At the outflow location, there's an AgriDrain real-time control retrofit that was installed this year, and that aims to optimize the capacity to manage stormwater. We can use machine learning algorithms to predict when the best time it is to open the gate at the control based on what precipitation trends we see, and the forecast predictions for the region. In this way, the longevity of the system is expanded and performance will continue to be successful. And then the last site that I'm involved with and I want to discuss is pretty new to the DRWI picture in comparison to the other two sites. It's a bioswale installed at Upper Darby, Pennsylvania as part of the Nailers Run stream system. So that's a bit closer to the Schuylkill River network. The swale was just constructed this year, and it is situated in a pretty highly developed region with a large amount of impervious surfaces observed. You can even see the street there with some buildings and rooftops there. We are in the process of instrumenting the control with soil moisture sensors and more water level sensors so we can track the water movement from the streets and rooftops through the swale and into the stream. So we're really concerned about inflows and outflows, the whole balance of our systems that we monitor. We have been looking at water quality and stream flow since 2019 to provide us with some pre-construction data for comparison so we can evaluate the performance of this SCM. So in terms of lessons learned for Nailers Run, first and foremost, it has become increasingly evident that the community members have a vested interest in the stream dynamics of their neighborhood. Every time that I've gone out to collect data or collect samples for water quality testing, someone has walked up to me and struck up conversation about what we are doing and how they have seen changes. There are people who are skeptical of a bioswale or the green stormwater infrastructure, but for the most part, we have seen some firsthand accounts that talk about how intense storms have brought destruction and flooding into their neighborhood. Once this swale was installed, we've had a few residents tell us how the flooding did not occur as intensely as it did before. And I've even had some people come up and talk about different fish that they started to see in the stream that they haven't seen before. So honestly, it's pretty rewarding to have this level of engagement with the community we are serving as engineers. The other major lesson is how urban areas are some of, if not the most vulnerable communities when it comes to stormwater related issues. Flash floods, erosion, streambed incision, major pollutant problems are just some of the issues that seem to be centralized in these regions when unmanaged. So monitoring the systems and implementing highly customizable stormwater controls like rain gardens and bioswales, which can kind of morph their geometry to fit the situation, will assist these urban areas in moving forward, which is a major benefit of the work that we are doing towards a more resilient future. So to kind of sum up what the future of stormwater may look like based on what I've seen during my time at Villanova, which is approaching 3 years at this point, and I have another 2 or 3 to go. Climate change threatens the local waterways, primarily through more frequent, more intense storms, triggering many of the issues you see here, like flooding and increased pollutant loads. The designs for these controls should be sustainable in the materials that they select, but also resilient to withstand the changes so that adaptation can be achieved for unforeseen circumstances, such as a change upstream or some sort of hydraulic event that alters how much water is coming into your system. It's pretty important to investigate the site, monitor the performance, conduct visual inspections to identify issues. If you know what to look for, maintenance is something that is easy to teach and reasonable to accomplish. So maintaining the system is important so that it can help perform as expected and enhance how long it meets the performance standards we expect. Native soils and plants are often the optimum choice because they mimic the pre-development hydrology that these controls are trying to accomplish. Some designs might not be conducive to that, but for the majority, that is a big consideration to try and use native materials, especially since they are cost effective. And finally, modeling and machine learning tools improve design optimization and system efficiency for present and future scenarios. We can teach our real-time controls to open the gate when we would like it to based on the trends we see and predictions for the future. The modeling helps inform what situations might occur, what worst case scenarios we might experience, and how well our systems can withstand those worst case scenarios. So with that, I'd like to thank all the members of our research center seen in the photograph here, as well as the William Penn Foundation and the ability to take part in the Delaware River Watershed Initiative. And I am not sure about questions in the chat, but I'm also open to recommendations or feedback that you might have, and please feel free to shoot me an email as well.
Thanks so much, Mike. We have time for one question. I don't think I saw anything come through, but Katie also put Mike's email in the chat if you'd like to reach out to him. All right, and there also will be some time at the end of the meeting today. If you think of a question after you've digested all of Mike's presentation and all of his advice, we can also address them at the end of our meeting today. So virtual round of applause for our first two speakers, Tim and Mike. Thank you so much for joining us today. Yep, Sue says, great presentation, Mike. So we're very grateful for all of our speakers today. Before we move into a break, we would like to announce some very special awards today. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, sorry about that technical difficulty. But every year we award one or two awards called SAN MVP Awards. These awards are in dedication to Kevin Munley. Kevin was a Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection employee who passed away in 2012. And to honor his dedication to improving our environment and the Schuylkill Action Network, every year we like to present these awards to one or two people who have shown that kind of same history of strong dedication and commitment to improving the Schuylkill River watershed, and just to show that we value and appreciate them for contributing to the Schuylkill Action Network. So this year we do have two awards for the SAN MVP, and I'm very excited to introduce our first awardee. Many of you may know her. She's actually a good friend and former coworker of mine. So I'd like to congratulate Virginia Vassilotti. She worked on the SAN at the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary, I believe from 2015 to 2020. She was the SAN fellow and then the SAN coordinator for many years. And she was absolutely fantastic as a coordinator. She did work that is still positively impacting how the SAN functions today. And she now works at the EPA Region 3 Source Water Team in Philadelphia. And she's actually here with us today. So I'm going to allow Virginia to say a few words. Looks like she's still coming online here.
Yeah, thanks, Erica. Sorry, it took me a second to join as a panelist. But I just want to say thanks, Erica. Thanks to the planning committee and really all the partners that make this SAN so successful. It's such an honor to receive this award. I remember every year when we had discussions with the planning committee trying to figure out who the SAN MVP award would go to. And, was always looking into partners who made a huge contribution, like someone who implemented numerous projects within the SAN, like a Larry Lloyd or Bill Reichard, an advocate who secured a lot of funding, or someone who had new creative ideas for the SAN. And so when I got the award, I was wondering what those conversations the planning committee must have been like. It was probably Erica and Chris and Renee and Krista and others saying, oh, she was involved with the SAN for 6 years, herding cats, organizing hundreds of meetings and driving all over the watershed to the point that she had to buy a new car. But seriously, this is amazing to receive this award. I'm so honored and thankful for all the amazing partners that I got to work with over the past 6 years, and excited that I can still continue to work with a lot of the partners that are here. And I just wanted to say that now that I'm at EPA, I get to engage with a number of other collaboratives throughout our region, and the SAN really is seen as a nationwide model. I remember people always telling me that, but it's true. There's people from all across the region, even nationwide, that always have questions about how the SAN was run, why it's so successful. And it's really because of all the amazing partners that are coming to the table. So I'm just so honored and thankful to have worked with you all for 6 years. And I hope that, within the next year or so, we can finally get together in person. I can see all of you again, but just wanted to say thanks again for recognizing me for this award. It's really amazing to receive it. So with that, I'll pass it back over to you, Erica.
Thanks, Virginia. Congratulations again. And thanks for agreeing to join us today and say a few words. I really can't think of too many people more deserving of the SAN MVP than Virginia. And then we do have another award today. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Megan to introduce our next awardee.
Thanks, Erica. I will do my best to keep it brief, but it is a true privilege to have one of my first official tasks with PDE and the SAN to introduce our next awardee, a Lifetime Achievement Award to Desiree Henning-Dudley, who many of you probably have had contact with. I've found her to be so supportive over the last decade that I've had the privilege of getting to work with her. But a brief recap of all of her support for the SAN in her tenure with DEP Southeast Region. Desiree has been a champion of the SAN, both as watershed manager and following her promotion to group manager and operations section chief. As a watershed manager, she was involved in the formation of the SAN, serving as a DEP representative on the planning committee and participating in the executive steering committee. She was instrumental in the creation of the Schuylkill River Restoration Fund and a member of that annual grant review team, and responsible for Schuylkill Action Network projects being a focus of Growing Greener grant application ranking processes. And even after a promotion process, she was still very much a supporter of SAN, kind of in a more behind the scenes fashion, informing Southeast Regional water staff about SAN priorities from the MS4, the NPDES program, the watershed managers in the Growing Greener program, and kept attending those executive steering committee meetings when they were at Norristown, and kept attending the SAN annual meeting as well. So I am just so thrilled that she's being honored in this way, and I would like to pass it off to Desiree. I did see that she was here, so hopefully you can accept your award now, Desiree.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Good morning. And I'm I'm honored, I'm humbled, I'm thrilled, all at once. And I have to say, having Megan introduce me is, wow, what a full circle for a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to be involved with the SAN. It is one of the best and most cherished highlights of my government career. I can truly say that it was something that actually started small and has grown so beautifully and involved so many people. And there's really plethora of people that I should thank for the opportunity I was given to be involved. And it is something I will never forget. In I guess it was 1999, somewhere around there, when I got involved with the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary when Kathy Klein was the executive director. And we were dealing with TMDLs, and they were relatively new, and we were focusing on the Wissahickon. And I remember a colleague who at the time was my partner, Nancy Crickman. We were just starting the watershed approach in state government, which was quite unusual at the time. And I remember her explaining to me how this focus was going to be more drinking water driven. And I thought, well, that's interesting. We were more focused on stormwater and construction and things of that nature. And boy, what an education I received as well, and recognizing that protecting our drinking water is a result of protecting everything else. So I simply can't thank the Planning Committee enough, particularly Joe Habelka and Janine Boyle, both of my colleagues who have been founding members of the department's involvement with the Schuylkill Action Network. And my goal from the get-go was to make the SAN as well known as the Chesapeake Bay, because I was tired of competing with the Chesapeake Bay all of my career. I kept crying for the Delaware to get some recognition, and the Schuylkill has finally, I believe, has made it to that level. So thank you so much to the Planning Committee. I'm just so humbled, and I'm so thankful, and really having the torch move forward. I remember when Megan started as a watershed specialist in Bucks County, and to see her now as the new coordinator is thrilling. And I'm just so appreciative of how much people have advanced the work of the SAN. And it's a great, great mission, and props to all of the partners who are involved. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Desiree.
Can I just chime in? I would be remiss. Joe asked to mention an early birthday greetings for Desiree as well, coming up a little later in the month. So I almost forgot that. I just wanted to
forget about
that in. No, each year's a gift, right?
You're right.
Well, happy birthday, Desiree, and congratulations again. I do wish we could be in person, so like you could hear our standing ovation. People have been congratulating both you and Virginia in the chat. And I also wanted to share, I do have awards here with me that we're going to get to Virginia and Desiree. But these are our 2021 awards, if you could see for folks on Zoom. If you're calling in, it's like a little glass sculpture, kind of in the shape of a raindrop with their names on it. So congratulations again. And we are a couple of minutes behind, so I'm going to move us to our break at this time. It's a 5-minute break, so feel free to get up, get a glass of water, use the restroom, whatever you need to do. And we will pick back up at 11:11. So I'll see you in 5 minutes. So we're gonna pick back up. I would love to introduce our next speaker, who is Michael Thompson. Michael is a water resource engineer at the Delaware River Basin Commission, and he's also an active member of our sand planning committee. He's been working to compile a lot of information about the withdrawals and consumptive use of the Delaware River watershed, which includes the Schuylkill River. And he has come up with a fantastic report and also an interactive tool to show how we've used our water in the past and what we can expect looking forward all the way through 2060. So we asked Michael to speak today to introduce you to all of these resources and to help us better understand our watershed and be more resilient in our decision making. So I will turn it over to Michael.
Thank you very much, Erica. Can you hear me? Is this going
Sounds
well?
good.
All right, so I'll start sharing my screen. Let me know if you can see this. Am I
Looks
sharing
good.
it? All right,
Yes.
it's always a gamble. So as Erica said, my name's Michael Thompson. I work for the Delaware River Basin in our water resource planning section. Today I'm going to be talking about a project that's been a long time coming. We've put a lot of effort into it, and I'm very happy to be able to be at this point presenting it. It's part of a larger project on overall water resource availability and sustainability planning that DRBC is undergoing. This is one of the first steps, so it's a very exciting first step, and seems like my MO has always been talk as fast as I can during these presentations, and I'm going to throw a lot of information out there, but hopefully I can skate through some of the details and open it up for people at the end if you have questions. So this is just an outline of what I'm going to try and get through, what and why we're doing, how we did it, what the results look like, specifically for the Schuylkill, some supplemental analysis, where we're going, and then some overview of the publication. I've thrown in the link of the report and the data down there at the bottom. Hopefully I have some time. Oops, didn't start my timer. Hopefully I have some time to talk about that at the end. So why are we projecting water withdrawal data? There's a main question that we're trying to answer, highlighted there in bold. Is there enough water to meet future demands? And then there's a couple sub questions that we have, like what even are the current and future demands? What are the water needs? How does it compare against what's currently been allocated? How does it compare against the repeat drought of record? What about climate change? There's a bunch of questions. What I'm going to be talking about today is that first one. What are the current and future demands? I've highlighted down at the bottom that this work is in alignment with what DRBC has been charged to do from the beginning, since the inception of the compact. Basically look at this data, analyze it, plan for it, and that the drought of record is a planning benchmark in DRBC's water code, which you can reference through the Code of Federal Regulations. So what are our objectives? The main one there with a little trophy next to it. Basically, we want to provide projections of future average annual water use in the Delaware River Basin through 2060, and we're going to use this data and these analyses in our future planning assessments on availability once we know what the current and future demands are projected to be. We also have multiple secondary requirements that we wanted to meet, like we want to represent each water use sector at a basin-wide scale, and I'll touch on what a sector is. We want to apply our groundwater results to different planning activities or planning regimes that we have, such as 147 subwatersheds in the Delaware River Basin, but also the southeastern Pennsylvania groundwater protected area, which I'll refer to as SEPA-GUAPA. We want the surface water results to be applicable at the source level. We want everything to relate back to regulatory approval. So we're really just asking for a lot from this study. But getting into it, how we started this, what data am I going to be talking about today? So there's two forms really, withdrawals and consumptive use. And I've thrown this diagram in case folks aren't quite familiar with what these terms mean. Everything in the report, there's a nice glossary section. So if you have questions, you can always reference that, and I'll keep referring to that throughout the presentation. It's in the report. But basically you can have withdrawals from either groundwater via these like 3 wells we have here that feed into a system. You can also take water from a surface water body, such as the Schuylkill River. So you get groundwater withdrawals, you get surface water withdrawals. Say you take 1,000 gallons out, you use it for some specific water use. If I get my nice little laser pointer, you use some specific water use. After that, if you need to, you treat it. You throw 800 gallons of treated water back into a surface water body. That means 200 gallons were quote unquote consumptively used, and you have a consumptive use ratio of 20%. So that's what the difference when I'm talking about withdrawals versus consumptive use in this presentation. So we have a lot of data, and we know we're going to have a lot of data. How do we stay organized? How do we break it down? Well, we're going to look at it by sector, and then you're thinking, what's a sector? So I don't expect that you're going to read all these tiny little words because it's in the report. But I did want to highlight that these are the 8 primary groupings or quote unquote sectors that I'm going to be talking about today. They range from anything from like public water supply, self-supplied domestic water use, power generation. So you can see them all there. There's an array of sectors, and within each sector, sometimes there's categories. So as an example, the industrial sector might include industrial water uses, refineries, as well as groundwater remediation. So we start this analysis by categorizing all water withdrawals in the Delaware River Basin, and then we start creating this hierarchy, and we break it down into like an organizational chart, if you want to think of it that way, in terms of the 8 sectors. So we start with all the data, and then we start breaking it down. Most sectors have one method, basically, of projecting the withdrawal data, and that's extrapolating it, basically throwing trend lines on it, looking at all the data and seeing what makes sense. There's 2 sectors that had different methods, which I'm not really going to touch on today just due to time, but those are the self-supplied domestic, and that was because of the data availability. There's not really reported data for those numbers, and then agriculture, just due to the feasibility, level of effort, and a bunch of assumptions that were made. So what data scale did we look at? Well, we really focused on the system level, and that's because 3 main reasons. The first being that metadata, which metadata, if you want to get philosophical, is just data about data. Metadata is often at the system level. Basically, if you're looking at regulatory information like allocation limits, also things like pump capacities or individual sources, it's all at the system level. Sometimes reporting inconsistencies can look like trends. If you have a system that started reporting in the 90s and another that started around 2000, it's going to look like a trend, but it's really not. And then often systems show cause and effect relationships. Like say you have 4 groundwater wells, you may not operate all 4 at once. You might use 2 and 2. So at a source level, it's not going to look like a trend, but when it's viewed as a system, it might be more apparent. As if it's not confusing enough that we're doing the analysis at the system level, I'm going to throw this chart up and try and touch on it real quick. We do the projections at a smaller level. So the example I took here was public water supply. We break it down into systems that are associated with DRBC approvals and those which aren't. About 99% of the reported data for public water supply in the Delaware River Basin is associated with an approval. Within those associated systems, we break it down into 1 to, let's say, 300. And then we're looking at an individual system on a basis. We'll look at, hey, there's groundwater and surface water. We know we want to group our groundwater by those planning regions I talked about, and that all of it can be viewed at the source level. Our goal is to perform these projections down here in order to meet our planning objectives, and then we're going to re-aggregate them and hope that that makes sense. So if you see these brown squares and these circles down here, I'm going to jump to the next slide. Basically, we create an equation for each one of those planning regions to meet our objectives, right, from that hierarchy. And it goes out to like multiple hundreds. Our goal is that when we add all those equations up, it's going to look like the data that we started with. So I've thrown this chart over here. Each one of these colored bands represents one of these different equations. We see how those equations start stacking on each other, how some have different start dates than other, and it compares to the overall total data fairly well, and that's what's called coherence. And we ultimately walk away with a coherent projection. This whole thing is called a bottom-up approach. This is the main method that we used. Overall, I've talked a good bit about the main methodology. We did a lot of QA/QC on the historic data. We had gone about this process by generating automated reports for each of the systems. It included over 600 system reports, which ends up being like over 3,000 pages of analysis. There's over 1,000 equations that end up describing this model, and it describes both withdrawal and consumptive use. So that's kind of the background. There's a lot more detail in the report, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what went into showing these results. So hopping right into the overall picture for the Delaware River Basin, this chart is showing the historic and the projected total water withdrawals from the Delaware River Basin over time. So each sector is shown by one of these different colors. You got this dash line here showing the data for this study prior to 2017. Well, prior to 2018, it includes 2017. So 1990 to 2017 is historic data. This is reported data, actuals, if you want to think about it that way. And then on the right side of this line is what is projected based on those like 1,100 projection equations. From this, we're able to make a couple preliminary conclusions just straight off the bat that we can say, based on this analysis, peak withdrawals have occurred within the Delaware River Basin. We're able to see significant decreases in withdrawals by thermoelectric facilities since 2007, which I'm not going to get into that additional analysis, but it was really shown to be attributed to a decline in production or withdrawal at coal-fired facilities using once-through cooling technology. And that really happened since 2007, and there was a resulting decrease in withdrawal. Public water supply has shown decreases, and it continues to show projected decreases despite a growing in-basin population. The hydroelectric band here, this green band, has not always consistently been reported by DRBC due to data availability, but we were able to compile a complete time series, and it's relatively significant in terms of total volume. Industrial withdrawals historically have decreased, but that was expected to plateau. So these are some of the findings that you get to see at the basin scale. I can also highlight that the peak withdrawal was about 9.9 billion gallons per day in 2005, and more recently in 2017, it was about 6.9 billion gallons per day, a difference of about 3 billion gallons per day over a course of about 10 years. So I'm going to take the same data, and when I talked about that withdrawal and consumptive use bit, I'm going to switch this data over to consumptive use. So this is the portion of water, the portion of that water that's not returned to the surface waters of the basin. So consumptive use overall is projected to remain relatively constant. The largest consumptive use are the out-of-basin exports under the US Supreme Court decrees. But looking at the other sectors, thermoelectric consumptive use, despite those large decreases in overall withdrawal, have remained relatively constant. And this was due to changes in energy generation technology, such as switching from once-through cooling to recirculating cooling. The recirculating evaporative cooling is a lot more consumptive because you're evaporating that water and it ends up leaving the basin. There's a lot of spatial variation in this data. I'm showing you the basin-wide picture, but once you start drilling down into those smaller regions, you start seeing that, oh, some things are changing over here that are not changing like over there. So it's interesting once you start drilling down into it. And based on this overall basin-wide consumptive use, we're able to compare it against previous DRBC estimates because the overall basin-wide consumptive use has been one of the most commonly projected forms of data by DRBC. So this slide is just kind of showing how this study compares against previous studies. I've highlighted the reported data that we were able to compile in QAQC in this gray, our projection equation going out in blue, an 80 and 95% predictive interval around that data, and then all these previous studies. The filled circles represent the estimates, the dash line, and then the open circles are the projections. And one of the things I just wanted to highlight is that many of these previous studies worked off of 1 year of estimated data and performed these projections indirectly by applying something like a population projection, like a population growth rate to that estimated year of water use. So you see that these estimated amounts of water consumptive use are really close to the reported data, but that this study gets to kind of take advantage of almost 30 years of actual reported data, and it provides one of the more conservative projections compared to all these previous studies. So if we recall our planning objectives, I've thrown two maps on the screen here. The figure on the left are the 147 subbasins delineated by a USGS report. We refer to it as Sloto and Buxton in 2006, and it's what we use in terms of groundwater availability. So there's 147 of these smaller subbasins. You see how they nest here within the Huck 8 watersheds. So the Schuylkill is shown here in pink. And then we also have the southeastern Pennsylvania groundwater protected area, which has like 76 subbasins on a different scale. So ultimately there ends up being like countless ways to reaggregate this data. You can look at withdrawal or consumptive use. You can look at sectors, categories, groundwater, surface water, basin, historic data, projected differences. It's just, there's too much to summarize in a report. I'm going to look at a couple things. We've highlighted a lot of it in the actual published report, but this is kind of why we ended up going down this road of some kind of interactive data visualization so that people can try and drill out the data that they need that's most useful for them. So looking at groundwater results in particular, the projection basin-wide was relatively constant. I didn't show that, but it was. The thing I wanted to highlight is that concept of spatial variation, and that while it is one constant projection, there are shown here about 50 subbasins with projected decreases, 40 with projected increases, and it just so happens that it ended up evening out. So you can see the areas in blue that are projected increases in groundwater withdrawal and the areas in red with projected decreases in groundwater withdrawal. And we can do the same thing for the southeastern Pennsylvania protected area. And now you're thinking, well, that's great, but what about the Schuylkill? That guy right there. Well, because these areas are able to be nested in the Huck 8 watersheds, we can look at those. So these are the 12 Huck 8s which comprise the Delaware River Basin. There's a couple conclusions that you can just draw. I know that you can't see these numbers or the trends are hard to discern, but the thing that human eyes can focus on relatively quickly is color. So you can see in the headwaters, the difference in sector is kind of in the headwaters is dominated by these out of basin diversions for public water supply. You get some large hydroelectric withdrawals as you start working your way down the basin over here. When you get towards the middle of the basin, it's kind of dominated by public water supply, industrial, kind of mixed with thermoelectric generations. Down towards the bay gets dominated by thermoelectric withdrawals, and then even public water supply and agriculture down towards Delaware. And you're thinking, okay, that's great, but what about the Schuylkill? All right, so I'm moving on to what about the Schuylkill? We can focus directly on the withdrawals. If I pull out that Huck 8 figure, two notes based on this graphic. This graphic is showing the water withdrawals from the boundary within the Schuylkill River watershed. So this is not water that's used necessarily within the watershed. This is water coming out of the basin's boundary. So there are known data gaps for just Pennsylvania overall for 2001, 2, and 4 for public water supply. So that's why you see these dips here. That's just actually missing data. And then another one is this big drop in the red, which is thermoelectric withdrawals, and that is related to the closure of Crombie Generating Station in about 2012. A couple years before that, there were drastic decreases and declines, and that was about 150 million gallons a day. So the dominant uses in the Schuylkill River watershed are public water supply. If you're looking at this table over here, I'm showing the averages post Crombie closure. So this is 2013 to 2017. About 60% for public water supply, 20% for thermoelectric, and then industrial comes in at third, and then the remainder is kind of smaller potatoes in comparison to the overall picture. So you're looking at about 360 million gallons a day coming out of the Schuylkill River watershed. I've given this breakdown here. At the bottom, I've ranked the systems. There were over 270 water withdrawal systems within the basin that were considered in this analysis. The top 10 systems ended up accounting for about 80% of that average. So these are really large withdrawal systems. This is both groundwater and surface water. When you take a step further, it's only 28 systems that account for 90% of that average. So then you really start tailing off on this curve where you get smaller and smaller systems. When you look at the projections, most of them are relatively constant. The one that stood out was public water supply, projected to decrease about 20 million gallons a day by 2060. Others like industrial, minus 1.5 million gallons a day. Self-supplied domestic plus 1 million gallons a day. But again, this is all at the watershed scale. So there are like sub-regional dynamics going on, but this is the overall picture. If I jump over to consumptive use, again, this is the portion after the withdrawal occurs that's not being returned. It is a little bit of a different picture. You'll notice right off the bat that thermoelectric kind of leapfrogged public water supply as the dominant force here. And that's really related to the difference in consumptive use ratios related to these sectors. You might have something like evaporative cooling at a thermoelectric facility, which is going to be much more consumptive than a public water supply system. So you actually get 2 thermoelectric systems, which were numbers, I think 19 and 48 ranked in terms of overall withdrawal, but they become number 5 and 9 in terms of consumptive use. And then you also have one industrial facility that enters the top 10 that was ranked number 29 in terms of total withdrawals, and it becomes number 8 in terms of consumptive use. So these numbers change even a little bit more. Rather than being just 80%, the top 10 systems account for 87% of the total consumptive use from the Schuylkill River watershed. So these numbers change a little bit. It's just interesting to see how these dynamics kind of change for the Schuylkill River. When I'm talking about sub-trends, I just wanted to zoom in on one of those figures. I'm looking at only groundwater now from the Schuylkill River watershed. And you see how I'm talking about, there are some areas like up here on, I guess, Chad reminded me of the leaping rabbit. So you have its ears up here and its back feet down here and its bunny tail there. So on the back of the rabbit, you have these increases in water withdrawals, and then projected down near the bottom of the watershed, you have decreases projected. So I know I'm running low on time based on my timer, but I did want to just talk about the population assessment because I thought it was pretty cool. We did this over the entire basin for the Delaware River Basin. We used EPA's 2010 asymmetrically mapped population data from the EPA EnviroAtlas, 30 by 30 meter pixels. They basically took 2010 census population, disaggregated it into 30 by 30 meter pixels based on land use data and slope data, basically assessing where can people live within a census block, where can they not live. This is an example highlighted here for one specific census block highlighted in white. We have our planning boundary in blue here. We have this gray area as a public water supply service area. And then you can see how within this census block, within the white census block, the population pixels get mapped over to here where people can actually live and up here where people can actually live. You know, no one's living up here on the ridges on these hills. So you can see how the population gets actually a little bit kicked over into this DB025 region and a little bit gets kicked over into DB027, and how this would be different from like just a straight weighted average or a centroid approach to population analyses. So we were able to conclude that about like 8.252 million people was the number for 2010 based on the census. But further, we were able to say that about 14% of those people do not live within public water supply service areas. So what I'm showing here, these are previous projections of in-basin population that DRBC had performed based on census data. This first band right here, 2010, is the estimate based on the EPA EnviroAtlas data. And then we were actually able to perform a projection of this data out to 2060 based on population county level projections from the NASA Socioeconomic Data and Application Center, CDAC, specifically the Center for International Earth Science Information Network at Columbia University. So I've given that citation here. You can find that data, it's publicly available, but we're able to break out this projection in terms of like state, because it's a raster, it's very spatially friendly in terms of disaggregating the data. You can show projections in terms of not only population, not only state, but what percent of those populations are anticipated to be within current service areas or not. And again, there's a lot of assumptions that go with this study, like we're not expanding or contracting or projecting service areas, which is a big assumption. So it's always good to go back to the report and just reference what was going on. We're able to quantitatively show that with this red line being our historic estimates of population and the projected population going up that I just showed, we can compare that against the total in-basin withdrawals by public water suppliers, which has actually decreased over 100 million gallons a day in like the last 30 years. So despite these growing in-basin populations and projected growing populations, we've seen decreasing withdrawals by public water suppliers and a projected continued decrease in withdrawal by public water suppliers. Despite the growing population, counterintuitively, the bulk of that population growth is weighted within areas, within service areas. So the amount of water being withdrawn by self-supplied domestic withdrawals has actually decreased because those populations are not growing at the same rate as the population in the service areas. So what about the Schuylkill? So I was able to pull this analysis together briefly, which really shows a consistent trend with the overall basin. This is a similar chart showing the gray are the total withdrawals by public water suppliers from sources within the Schuylkill River boundary. So specifically, and then it projects out here. So you see significant decreases and continued decreases being projected compared to the estimated population here. So total about 1.655 million people residing within the bunny rabbit here. It's a weird phrase, but is what it is. So 1.655 million people, projected continued growth, about 20,000 people by 2060 outside of public water supply service areas, about 200,000 people within those service areas. So we see kind of a similar trend, whereas the population, I can't show the population prior to this date because previous estimates were not done in this kind of a manner where it can be spatially kind of separated because of this raster analysis, but I would assume it's a growing population back here and then a continued projection growing population similar to those basin analyses. I just wanted to highlight this is an in-basin watershed population. It is not a population served. You can see this public water supply service areas are very dense network down here. So there's a lot of dynamics where water is moving around. So it's not population served. I'm just talking about the in-basin population. Where we go from here, an interactive data platform, groundwater availability analyses that I've kind of touched on, and surface water analyses. I think I'm out of time. So there's a website with our deliverables, and hopefully the data interactive bit gets up there soon. You can actually download all the data behind this report, use it. The thought is if you're not super tech savvy, you don't really want to download and manipulate the data yourself. Hopefully you'll be able to interact with it on some kind of platform such as this relatively soon. And with that, questions, but I believe I'm out of time. So
Thanks so much, Michael. I think we are going to move on to Abby, but please do put questions for Michael in the Q&A. He's actually able to answer them in the Q&A, and then if there's time at the end, we can circle back as well. There's a lot of data that Michael has been working on, really great stuff. We appreciate you pulling out the Schuylkill data as well. So if you have questions for Michael, please email him, do look at that report. And there's a lot that we can do there with climate change and environmental justice, making decisions with our work moving forward. So round of applause, virtual round of applause for Michael. We'll circle back to questions later, but at this time, I'm going to introduce our last, but certainly not least speaker of the day, Abby Sullivan with the Philadelphia Water Department. Abby has many years of experience working on climate change adaptation solutions, planning, and public outreach. And she currently manages the Climate Change Adaptation Program at PWD, Philadelphia Water Department. So today, Abby will be giving us information about this program so that we can potentially use it as a model for our own planning purposes, and also see what lessons learned they found for the Philadelphia area, just going along with our adaptation and resilience theme for today. So take it away, Abby. I'll turn it off to you.
Thanks. Thanks so much. I'm really excited to be here. It's always so inspiring to see all the great work happening in the Schuylkill through SAN. I do just want to mention that I actually don't manage the adaptation program. I have a fantastic manager, Julia Rockwell, so don't want to take any credit away from her. But I do lead all of our coastal inundation work. Oops, sorry. Can you guys see my slides?
Not yet.
Okay, sorry. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, now we can. Perfect.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Okay, so I know we're kind of short on time, so I will kind of just skim through the beginning here. So I think probably most of you that are still on this, at this meeting are familiar with the Philadelphia Water Department, but we do always like to start off by saying that we are a one water utility. So we provide drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater services. We have 3 major water treatment plants. We have 3 major wastewater treatment plants. We have thousands of miles of sewer mains and drinking water mains. We have millions of assets, and we're at the bottom of 2 large watersheds. So Schuylkill, obviously, and the Delaware, and those are our source waters. So we're really dependent on and really value our partnerships with entities working up within these watersheds. And so, our partnership with SAN and organizations like DRBC are really important to us. The work we do to achieve our mission is driven by sort of these 4 main steps. So we work to understand, analyze, plan, and implement. And a lot of what we do at the Philadelphia Water Department is driven by data and the best available science. So we, similar to what Michael was presenting, we collect lots of data, we use that data, we analyze it to understand what's happening in the watershed and, what's happening to the resources that we need to provide our critical services to the residents of Philadelphia and neighboring communities. We also build sophisticated tools, and we use those tools to understand not only our systems, but also the environment, so that we can make really, data-based science planning decisions. And a lot of these sophisticated tools are models. So we got a great preview again from Michael's presentation of how models can sometimes be used to understand conditions and make decisions. We use those tools to help us make these watershed-wide planning decisions. And again, our partnerships with organizations and other entities working throughout the watershed is so important. And then we use those, the plans that we come up with, the actions that we identify, we implement those using innovative approaches. So adaptive management, policy changes, using different technologies, and using networks and partnerships. And when you start thinking about climate change, we often say climate change is water change. And so we have to look at the lens, look through the lens of climate change at everything that we do. So climate change is going to impact our drinking water, our wastewater, and our stormwater services that we provide. So we really need to be thinking about this issue as we make plans moving forward. So in 2014, the department established the Climate Change Adaptation Program. And the program goal is to reduce the risks and also the expenses that PWD will face from the impacts of climate change by identifying and implementing effective and feasible adaptation strategies. And that's sort of, this stock language. But the thing is, I really like that our goal calls out the associated expenses, because we really feel like it's our due diligence to make sure that we're coming up with the most cost-effective solutions that will save us money over time. Because Philadelphia has many underserved communities. We have high rates of poverty. Nearly a quarter of our population is living in poverty. So we really, we depend on our ratepayers to fund the work that we do. And we know that there's a lot of Philadelphians that, struggle to even pay their water bills. And so I think, it's our due diligence to really be preparing for climate change and making sure that our services are equitable and can reach all of our customers, and that they aren't going to, have astronomical costs associated with them. So we're preparing for a future that's going to have more precipitation, higher sea levels, higher air temperature, and potentially more drought, and then also more extreme storm events. And that's really talking about the number of heavy and extremely heavy precipitation events that we'll see annually. And the information that we're getting, these climate projections, they come from global climate models, and then they can be downscaled so that you understand them more on a local level. And, we work very closely with the city, with different departments, the planning department, the Office of Sustainability, and we work with them and using the information that they provide through reports and studies. So a lot of our work builds off of what was put out through the Growing Stronger report, which is sort of a climate action plan for Philadelphia. So the biggest priority risks for us to address are really coastal, riverine, and infrastructure-based flooding. So, the things that are going to drive this flooding is sea level rise, these extreme storms, these increases in precipitation extremes. And also, we have this sewer, stormwater system. So our infrastructure can also be, part of the issue. And so we're studying this issue, trying to understand what our risks are. And so, we can see in recent memory, we all are aware of the damage that occurred during Tropical Storm Ida. These images here are from Ida and one from a decade ago from Tropical Storm Irene. The Eastwick community was hit really badly in Tropical Storm Isaias, and we're living through these extreme events, and we can see that it disproportionately affects underserved populations. And so we really, it's our duty to really prepare for this and work as a city to plan on a regional level, local and regional level, to address these issues. Tropical Storm Ida, obviously, many of us probably on this call experienced this and saw the catastrophic damage that occurred. Another priority risk for us to address are water quality impacts. So, higher air temperatures have the potential to cause more algal blooms and more growth of different things in the water supply. This image is actually showing duckweed. That's not an algal bloom, but it's just representative of the fact that higher temperatures can lead to different water quality impacts. We also have more stormwater runoff that can make the water more turbid to begin with. So we have issues when it comes to treating higher, water supply that's warmer. So there's lots of water quality impacts that we're anticipating and trying to study and address. And then there's also this issue of sea level rise that could cause issues with salinity intrusion. And so on the right here, you can see this diagram from DRBC. This darker blue area shows you that salt front. So that's the area where the salty water with more chlorides coming up from the ocean are mixing with the fresh water coming down the Delaware. Now, this salt front can move up and down, and depending on the environmental conditions, it could come farther towards Philadelphia. And the biggest concern is that this salt front could reach our Baxter drinking water intake, as that facility is not designed to remove chlorides from the water. So, our team is working with other water quality modelers within the department to understand this issue and really address the risk that this poses to our drinking water supply. So when we started doing this work back in 2014, we thought it would be fairly straightforward, that we would have this global climate model output, these projections, and we would be able to just use them in our plans and processes within the department. But we quickly realized that we actually have to do a lot of work to tweak the data that we're getting from the global climate models We can use downscaled information, but we actually need to work with it even further to make it usable in the sophisticated models and tools that we have at the Philadelphia Water Department. And I'll give you an example. So precipitation output from the global climate models, even if it's downscaled, meaning it was localized for Philadelphia, it's given in daily increments. Well, our models, and we have models that are looking at the sewer shed scale. We have models that look at the tributary scale. We have river reach scale. And then we also have basin scale modeling. And a lot of the inputs for these models would need higher resolution precipitation data. So they'd need more than just a daily max or min. And so we actually had to come up with methods and different ways to use that information and tweak it and develop tools that make the science actionable, what we call actionable science. So data analyses, projections, or tools that can support the decisions regarding the management of risks and impacts of climate change. And I'm going to use a few more examples moving forward of how our team has spent years trying to take the climate projections and make them actionable here at PWD. So if we take sea level rise and storm surge, and this is really the work that I focus on, our risks to the department include flooding of assets. This could be our assets that are below grade or assets at the surface. We have treatment plants that are right along the rivers. So this is a huge concern, and we have pumping stations as well. It could increase our energy demands, and this could, increase our carbon footprint, which is not great for climate change, increase our pumping demand, and we could also have that degraded source water quality, like I just mentioned a minute ago. So the way we take the science and make it actionable is we've done a lot of analysis of the sea level rise projections. We've done analysis of our tide gauge record to understand storm surge return periods, recurrence intervals on the Delaware River. We can then use that information in customized tools. So we developed a GIS screening tool to look at where would the flooding using future scenarios of sea level rise and storm surge, where would that flooding go? And then what assets at our plants and what, pumping stations, which assets would be inundated by these different scenarios. We can come up with planning mechanisms and design tools to basically address these flood risks. So we're developing, we did develop a design flood elevation that we're hoping to get approved as policy for PWD moving forward, so that we would have to design to a new flood elevation that's more protective than the local regulations. And then we can also, for that salinity piece, as I said, we're working with teams within the water department that are really the specialists on water quality modeling, and they're developing a salinity model to understand that saltwater intrusion piece. So I guess I'm just we don't really have time, so I'm gonna just feature a few tools, one for the sea level rise and storm surge work, and then I'll feature a tool that we developed for looking at precipitation increases. So our inundation model is a bathtub model that was developed in GIS. It's fairly straightforward, but what it allows us to do, as I mentioned, is map these different scenarios, these many future scenarios. And so we can provide these high resolution maps to our operators at the plants so that they can understand what future flooding could look like under these different scenarios, and then what assets could be flooded under those scenarios as well. We built an entire story map online so that this can be easily accessible by our staff. And then here are just some visual examples so that you guys can see the results of this. So if we're looking at the mid-century, this is zoomed into our Southwest water pollution control plant. If we look at mean high water mid-century, this blue, you can see that the tide is starting to come onto land in certain areas. If we add storms on top of that tide, you start to see some major flooding at our plants. And this is using what we consider our primary planning sea level rise scenario. And this is just one scenario that we've looked at. This is using NOAA's projections from their 2017 report. And so we're using the intermediate high scenario. And this is a pretty high sea level rise scenario, but our team chose this because of the low risk tolerance that we have, because we do provide these critical assets, critical resources to, drinking water, wastewater services to over, 1 million residents. And our infrastructure is very interconnected. A lot of it is underground. And so given that low risk tolerance, we chose this sort of higher sea level rise projection. The end of century map, you start to see there's major issues, even just with the projected high tide, mean high or high water, that could be inundating our plant by the end of the century using that sea level rise scenario that I mentioned. When you add storms on top of it, it's pretty much the entire plant. If we look at precipitation, increases in the intensity of the rainfall that we're expected to see, this poses some serious risks to our systems. This could mean more frequent combined sewer overflows, increased erosion and sediment transport, increased flooding along our rivers and creeks, and then, increased infrastructure-based flooding. So this could impact our residents in their basements or as sewer backups. So the actionable science that we developed for this was the example I gave before, was really working with that precipitation output from the global climate models and trying to make it high resolution where it was less than just a daily output. And once we were able to come up with a method to do that, we're able to actually adjust our future design storms. And we also developed a stochastic rainfall generator that allows us to look at that variability. Another tool that we were able to create was what we call sort of climate perturbed IDF frequency curves. So an IDF curve is just looking at the intensity, duration, and frequency of rainfall. So if you look at this example on this graph, you can see if we're looking at a 3-inch per hour rain event, that has a 100-year return period looking at historic data. But if you add in the climate perturbed IDF curve, so the mid-century is this little dotted one, and then the larger dots are the end of century. So by the end of century, a 3-inch per hour rain event ends up becoming a 30-year return period. So you went from it being a 100-year event down to a 30-year event. So that's the type of tools that our team is developing for use within the department. If you want to know more about the methods of how we work with that precipitation output and sort of, massaged it so that we could make it actionable within our models, there is a publication in ASCE on the methods. So I'll really quickly wrap up. I know we're at time, but basically we use this information in making policy changes, updating design standards, and coming up with new management approaches for protecting our existing assets and for ensuring that our future assets are designed with climate change in mind. I think I'll leave it at that. We do, have a large Green City Clean Waters program that does green stormwater infrastructure throughout the city. This is specifically for our CSOs, but it also does help build us resiliency to climate change. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that. And then we also have, networks that we work with, people like you, San, and also the Water Utility Climate Alliance, that really are letting us sort of lead this work across the nation and learn from our peers that are leaders in this field. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you. And I know we're at time, so.
Thank you so much, Abby. We did have a couple of questions in the Q&A if you want to address those just by typing them out. But again, that was some fantastic data for our region regarding climate change, where we're headed. And so I encourage everyone to reach out to Abby if you have questions. We also put her email in the chat there. So we are almost at the end of our meeting today. I feel like we really only scratched the surface of what our partners have been working on and all these great resources that are available. So definitely more to come. And I want to once again say a huge thank you to all of our speakers and a very big congratulations to our awardees today, Virginia and Desiree. If you have to leave at 12, that's no problem, but I also will be sending out a feedback survey if you could fill that out. If you have a couple of minutes to stick around and you'd like to, I will actually promote everyone who's an attendee to be able to unmute and show their video and continue to ask questions if you'd like to stick around. So just bear with me here as we allow everyone to speak. And in the meantime, feel free to ask questions. I know one came through for you, Abby. Sandy asked if we see any salinity above the Fairmount Dam when the tides and floods top it off, as we did with Hurricane Ida.
I'm sorry, what was the, or is she asking?
Yeah, so it's in the Q&A. She's asking if we see any salinity above the Fairmount Dam when the tides and floods basically flood over the dam.
Yeah, so our model, which again is not the best model to use for looking at storm surge, which is when that type of, I think for the saltwater to get all the way up to the Fairmount Dam, we'd be talking about a really extreme event or much farther into the future. So we don't see salinity coming up to the Fairmount Dam at this point, but with those sea level rise projections, we could at some point in the future, but that's a really complex thing that our model doesn't really do a good job of understanding, because ours is a simple bathtub model. It doesn't account for the flows that are coming down from the Schuylkill watershed. So it really would be more of a dynamic model that would be needed, a compound flood model, to really understand that dynamic between the riverine and that coastal tidal piece coming up. And then the dam makes it even more complicated. So we actually don't have a great tool. I did want to add that, I wish we had more information specific to the Schuylkill watershed, but we're just not there yet. We do want to do a lot more work looking at the riverine piece. And I think, in the next few years, that's probably something that we will focus on more.
Great, thanks, Abby. I'm still working on opening up the meeting for everyone. So if you're joining us as an attendee, feel free to turn on your camera and mic if you have anything you want to talk about today. I know we're trying to do this networking component on Zoom, so it's a little different today, but bear with us.